Good morning. We are learning in Toras Sholom, which is from the Rebbe Rashab, from his Sichos, the Sicha of Simplest Torah 1913, which is Simchas Torah Tofresh Ayin Daled. Actually, exactly 90 years ago, Simchas Torah. Yeah, I did not lose sight of the fact that a few weeks ago Simchas Torah was the terrible attack in Israel. So maybe this is part of the tikkun, helping out on our end of things. And it's all the merit of the people there, our dear brothers and sisters in the Holy Land. May they all be protected. So we've been learning about Achdus Hashem, about divine unity. And this is to help explain the end of Ayin Beis, which we had finished reading, the end of page 1470, 1477. So we're going to be continuing the Toras Sholom, then we're going to go back to Ayin Beis and further try to figure out the picture that the Rebbe Rashab has painted in this conclusion. So about divine unity, which in other words is essentially interface. When we're talking about the theme of Ayin Beis being interface, that's what unity is. Uniting, like he says, the mitzvah is liyachid. From the worlds, from our existence, we have a mitzvah to be miyachid and connect and unite godliness with our existence. They made it very clear that the mitzvah is not just that God is united and he is exclusive, but that from existence we come to appreciate it. And there are two ways that the yichud happens. Mamata l'mayla, mamayla l'mata. Both are effort. So as he qualified, like we learned yesterday, and I'll sum it up, that even the yichud mamayla l'mata is not just that God is revealing himself, that we are looking at existence through the eyes of how God sees existence. So it's also us doing it. And that's why he called that somewhat of a lower level. When we take existence that is a fragmented, disjointed, and separate reality, and we come to appreciate godliness, we're elevating. That's an aliyah. We're taking a fragmented existence and coming to demonstrate the unity, divine unity within it. He called that is inyan li'ardei amayla. Yeah, but mamayla lamata, actually, from a point of view of Atzmus sees existence a lot better than we do. He sees that reality, but yet we also are commanded in the yichud that we should also draw down how God sees existence, through God's eyes, how he sees it. And that he called a nidrika, because at the end of the day, it's us that's doing it. So it's no question it's an achievement because we're coming to appreciate it. But if you compared purely the so-called perspective from the mashpia's eyes himself, or how we look at through the mashpia's eyes, obviously our look is not going to be as pure of what Atzmus is. In other words, when the art, the first mamata l'mayla is that the art, we see through the art, we come to appreciate the artist. The second level is that we're looking at the art through the eyes of the artist. And the third is the artist himself, how he sees the art is going to be obviously a much higher level. Now, whether we can reach that level or not, I left it that we'll see. I think from Ayin Beis it appears that we could. But right now we're talking about mamata l'mayla, mamayla l'mata. So those are the two things. To explain it, he brought v'yadaita yayim, this operative verse in Beschanon, in the book of Deuteronomy, that talks about this yichud, that says, v'yadaita v'shavesel v'vecha, that both in our minds and our hearts, we need to know Havaya hu Elikim, that's a yichud. That Havaya is Elikim. Havaya, the transcendent God that's beyond existence, is one with the divine energy that's within existence. In other words, the fact that God created existence is one with that which is God who's beyond existence from the point of view of God. And that's b'shamayim emal v'oretz mitachas einayd. Nothing else but God. That's what Havaya Elikim comes to teach us. In other words, when we understand that the tzimtzum, as he explains afterwards, is also one with Havaya, it's all part of God. It's all nichel, it's God's power to conceal. Then we understand that Einay is nothing but God. Because even the tzimtzum, even the concealment, which doesn't conceal from God's perspective, because it's just another power of his. Like we said, the teacher has the power to speak, he has the power to withhold. That doesn't in any way affect him. It's all coming from one place. So he explained that the Pirush Ein Eid is, he says, that by knowing that Havaya Elikim, then you know Shemayim Ba'aretz B'tachas Ein Eid. Then you know that it's Ein Eid. Once you know that Havaya is Elikim, then you know that the heaven above and earth below, Ein Eid, there's nothing but God. And he explained Ein Eid doesn't just mean there's nothing else. There's not even a Tover Toffel. That's, he says, the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe, of the Rebbe. Not even a secondary, not even a smidgen, not even anything but God. Everything is, and then he explains why, because all of existence comes through the tzimtzum. He says, Oir and Mitzias all comes through a tzimtzum, as he explains here in, I'm reviewing column 2 on page 197. And then he said, I'm not afraid to say also Atzilus is distant from Atzmus, right? Because it's all something that is not Atzmus. He said the more that something becomes tangible as a Metzias, the more concealed is its source. And he gave the example from the difference between letters of speech, dibur, and letters of thought. Letters of speech, because it's somewhat a step away from your core thoughts and ideas. That's why the letters become more tangible, and another person can they're palpable, they can be touched, they can be sensed. Whereas the letters of thought, since they're more closer to you, and it's more within you, only you know those, only you know the idea, no one else does. It's not it's the more the less the mitzias. And they go all the way into the letters within the core of the soul, they're all together. We don't know, the letters have no tangibility at all. There's no defined letters altogether, even though they're there. So what the bottom line you see is that wherever there's more there's less mitzias. So therefore, tzimtzum is necessary for the existence to be the way it is, an entity that has some form of independence. Means that in some way, the core divine etzem has to be concealed from it. That's called tzimtzum. But that tzimtzum is not from the perspective of Atzmus. It's only from our perspective. Like we learned in Ayin Beis, that it's only from this side of the curtain. We don't see it. But from God's perspective, he says like this, Tzimtzum does not conceal. Because the tzimtzum is part of Koyach Atzmus, just like the Koyach HaGili. I think these words were almost word for word what he said in Ayin Beis as well. I just want to see for a second. Yeah. Yeah, on page 1474, the Rebbe Rashab said exactly the same thing.
In which page? Toras Sholom.
I'm looking at 198 now.
Thank you.
Yeah, 1 second. Just want to see the exact language here. Yeah. Yeah, in Ayin Beis, he said it in the language that there's the ratzon for God to reveal Oyer, and there's the ratzon to reveal Oyer that relates to the world. But earlier he said also that tzimtzum itself is just another koyach of the Eibishter, koyach Ein Sof. Yeah, koyach Ein Sof k'may koyach HaGili. Literally, b'chinas ha'hester koyach Ein Sof k'may koyach HaGili. It's almost word for word what it says here. So what do we know from this? So we know from this, and this is the Yichud Lamata Lamayla, we come to understand that the existence as we know it is only from our perspective. But if you look at before the Tzimtzum, from God's perspective, it's just another power of his called the Koyach Tzimtzum. And therefore there's the Metzias of existence, therefore, is all of existence just simply a divine force. Yeah, and Ein Sof also radiates everywhere, but we're not mechuyev, we're not obligated to miyachid Ein Sof, like he said. But in Atzmus we are. So how do we explain it? So we have to say that this power of Tzimtzum, that for us creates existence as we know it, is really miyuchad, one with God, because it's really kol batzmuseh. It's really God's power. It's also God's power. So when you look at a world and you say, I don't see godliness, the truth is, what we should be saying is you're seeing a godliness that you can't see. You're seeing God's power to conceal himself. So it's also, hein hein gvureisov. He doesn't use that expression here. In Shar Yichud Amunah, he uses that expression. So it's interesting. So our contemplation comes to realize it's one thing you see godliness through Giluyim. Giluyim are God's blessings, a miracle. But you could also see godliness by not seeing, by saying, look how profound God is. He's able to hold back. He's holding back and allowing us to be. That's also a power of God. That's the Yichud Mamat L'mayla, that you're recognizing that the Helam is really Kol Batzmuseh. In actuality, it creates a concealment, and we don't see, but that's the mitzvah. For us to do our best to be able to appreciate that the whole Helam is really just a power from Atzmus. And that's what he goes on to explain. That therefore God knows existence through knowing himself. Since he knows himself, and existence is an extension through the power of Helam, so that's why he knows all of existence. So then the Rebbe Rashab qualifies. If that's the case, so that means there's no existence. Because from that point of view, there's no existence. He says, no, you can't say that. Because Shem Elikim, the Tzimtzum is a Shem Emes. It's one of the Shemes, Shiva Shemes She'enim Nechakim. It's a holy name. You're not allowed to erase the name Elikim. The Hashem is the Semes. That's why we say Havayu Elikim. We don't just say Havaya. Havayu Elikim. Elikim is a real name. This is, Elikim indicates Ambala Keich Vayechel is the power of God to conceal. So just like Havaya is the power of God to reveal Midas Harachamim, Shem Elikim, Bereshis Bod Elikim, is also a power. It's a power to create, which means the power to conceal. So he says, B'mel is Farana Hester, which means there is a Yesh that's created, which is the Hester. Amna Hester Ukol Batzmuseh. However, the Hester is encompassed in Atzmus. On our side of the curtain, before we do this level of Yichud, there's us and there's God. But now the Yichud is teaching us that this very Hester, this very Shem Elikim that God is using to conceal, is all encompassed within Atzmus. That's also God's power. I'm just summing up what we've learned. And therefore it doesn't conceal or cover up on Atzmus. From our perspective, it does, but that's what our contemplation, when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and we say Baruch Shem, we're coming to understand the Yichud, that the Yichud Mamat L'mayla is that existence as we know it is really an existence that is within God's consciousness, so to speak. And there's no concealment at all, because it's just his power to conceal. Like the teacher who's withholding something that the student doesn't hear, but from the teacher's point of view, it's completely there. It's all part of the teacher. Das kommt uns zu, as es ist Farana Hester, Amna Hester Kol Batzmuseh. This is all Yichud Mamat L'mayla, because we're not negating existence. We're saying there's an existence, but the existence is all as it is within Atzmus. That's the Yichud that we come to through this Avodah. So that leads us to Einay, that there's nothing but God. Even existence is as it's encompassed within God. Then the Rebbe Rashab concludes here. And he says, and this I think goes hand in hand with what he said earlier, that when you climb from the bottom, remember, he said there are limitations, there are obstacles. Like when you climb up a mountain, there are obstacles. You need to be strong. You need to have different tools to climb. And even when you climb, it's still relative to you. So that's what I think he means here, but he says now, he says like this. Is does veseminit, wie das fort. How it actually works, all the detailed mechanics, we don't know. Because remember, it's coming from us. We're trying to understand how existence is seen by Atzmus. But it's still Mamat Lamaila. We'll soon get to Mamayla Lamata. So how it is exactly. As a Sifrana Hestun, it is Kol Batzmuse. That you have this paradox, that on one hand there is a Hester, but from God's point of view, it's not a concealment. It's encompassed in Atzmus. Veseminit. Warum wie sollen wir sagen, als es nicht, warum wie sollen wir sagen, als es ist nicht nesavig geworden, können wir das nicht sagen. We can't say something wasn't created because we know God did create existence. While the Shem Elikim is Shem Emes. And Shem Elikim, Bereshit Bara Elikim, is a true name. It's not an illusion, God forbid. So that's so we have this paradox. We can't say it wasn't. If we said existence didn't exist and it's an illusion, it'd be easier to understand. But to say that it's real, but it's all encompassed within Atzmus, that's something we can't completely understand. Then another option is was then is Yenesavingon and Vizay does call Batzmuse. So how can we understand that it was created, but it's still encompassed in Atzmus? That's the yichud that we're talking about. So another way to say it was then Zolman Zogen at the Hester is a violet. Another way you can explain it, perhaps, that there is a Hester, but it's only temporary. In other words, for a moment there was an actual concealment, and then it was Nichl and Atzmuse. So he says also that Hein V is the violet. How does it work that moment when you say there's a Hester? Was then Zomazong as Atzmus gate noch dem Keach Hester. So then another way of explaining it is that Atzmus, so to speak, is following his power to conceal. It's like the teacher who right now is not revealing. Azevi Azach was gate noch Azach. Like when you have someone follows another. So Nordos is aber echt nicht moving. That also is not understood. So in other words, however you twist and turn it, the Rebbe Rashab is saying that when you climb from the bottom up and try to understand how existence is one with Atzmus, you can understand in general, but the details, he says, does the gate nita bregele, means we can't fully get to the bottom of it. We need to have some matter of this, we have to leave that for faith. And we're not responsible for more. We have to do our best in this mitzvah of yichud to try to understand how existence is not just one with God, but is all encompassed within Atzmus. So we understand that that's how it is, but we don't know Eicho Mahu, that we don't understand. Leave that for Amunah. When in Atzmus, it does mistame recht. He says mistame, interesting expression. He says in Atzmus, that is probably correct, meaning we rely that Atzmus has it all worked out. So that's what we reach as best as we can with our minds, where we come to understand that existence as we know it, as separate from Atzmus, is not correct. Even the concealment is not separate, because the concealment is also called Atzmus. So there is an existence, there is a Shem Elikim, but it's all within the miyuchud, means it's all miyuchud einaid in Atzmus. That's the yichud mamat l'mayla. That's where we stopped. As I said, I think we'll understand it better when we compare it now to yichud mamayla lamat, which is also us contemplating. It's also our yichud, meaning coming through us, but it's looking at it very differently. Not beginning. The beginning point here was existence, and from existence we worked our way back to the source. Now he's going to teach us how to look from the source into existence. And you'll see, interestingly, it's a different perspective. It sounds a little similar, but you'll see it's quite different. And that's what we're going to learn now. But I'll stop if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, he said, is ot do der gate nit abregela, which means that there is nothing that we could understand. Not that we understand a little bit. In this point,
I disagree. I think it's the exact opposite. We understand, but we can't understand it completely. Read on. He says right away. He says right after. It does verstehen mir as es is azay. No mir verstehen nicht dem echo mahu. A bregele means just a little part we don't understand. That's what he's saying. Why he should just say is das versteht nicht? Why does he say Bregele?
A Bregele means that this is impossible to understand.
No, Bregele means a very little. What does the word Bregele mean? A little.
Even
Bregele is not a corner, like a little part. In other words, we can't quite come to the end. We understand, but there's something that still remains elusive. That's how I understand what he means.
We can't wrap our minds around it because
it's like there's things that you come to, and then something still remains. You hear this lahavdil in science all the time. Physicists tell you, quantum mechanics, we understand it, but there's something that remains somewhat beyond us. That's how I understand. If you read the whole piece, that's what he says. That's what I understand. And that's why it goes back and forth. Like you could think this way, but you can't really understand that. You could think this way. He goes 3 times. I think this is all going back, like I said, when you go from the bottom up, when you're going from the art to the artist, you could understand the artist to some extent, but something will still remain beyond you. That's what my understanding of what he's saying here. Let's learn the other yichud, Milmai Lamata. And you'll see there, interestingly, the Rebbe Rashab comes to there he says a different conclusion. But he says it with a smile, as we'll soon see. Okay? Any other questions?
could you say that it's an aspect of Atzmus, or it's just fully encompassed by Atzmus?
Well, what when you say it, what is it?
Existence, including the symptom and everything. Is that a way to describe it, or should it not?
Give me the 2 options again.
I'm sorry. All right, never mind. I'll just listen.
No, are there 2 options? You're asking me, is it what or what? What are the options?
Is another way of saying it so that we can understand it better, that existence or Elohim is obviously its truth, and it is an aspect of the larger truth, or no? Is it
or what? What's the other option?
There is no other option. I guess I'm saying, is that a good way to sort of think about it?
He doesn't call it an aspect. He calls it a power. If that's, I don't know if there's a difference, if that's what you mean by aspect. And he says it's encompassed within him.
Okay. That's
so,
pretty thing.
Does it mean that he has other powers? Of course, he has other aspects.
Right.
Atzmus is not defined by his power to conceal. Atzmus is not defined by his power to create. The fact that existence exists doesn't mean that God is defined by existence. That's a whole other story. God is far beyond. The artist is not defined by his art. However, the art exists within the art. The way the artist looks at the art, the way we understand how the artist looks at the art, we see it as God's power. By looking at himself, he understands all of existence because it's all encompassed within him. But it's still, keep in mind, this is all still looking through the lens of existence.
Right.
It's not completely looking through the lens of the artist, meaning before he's even create. We'll see in a moment the other perspective. Okay.
Thank you.
I shall explain it more, but I want to first see the contrast so I can then juxtapose the two and say, okay, here are the 2 ways to look at things. Now, this next paragraph, I have been struggling with for 40 years, meaning it's so abstract, but it's very geschmack, as we said yesterday. It's very pleasant, but there's something about it that you'll see is quite. It's the Rebbe Rashab at his full glory, explaining the paradox of reality. Okay, Omnom. So now the bottom of page 198, if you're following along, the text was posted on our group, bottom of 198. Now he goes, Omnom, that's the yichud we spoke about as Mamata Lamayl. It's like the one below climbing up. And we've climbed up to the point where we can understand almost that there is an existence. There's a Shem Elikim, Havaya Elikim, but it's one with Havaya. it's encompassed within Atzmus, because Atzmus' power to conceal is just like his power to reveal. And therefore, Einoid, all of existence is nothing but Atzmus. However, it's all how existence is encompassed in Atzmus. Now he says, Omnam, however, by contrast, the yichud, the manner of uniting, when you go from the top down, in other words, we're not going from existence to God. We're going from God to existence. That the Hesed itself is Atzmus. Nit nervous that Hesed is called Atzmus. Not only that the Hesed is encompassed in Atzmus, but it itself is Atzmus. So now we're talking, I know it sounds like a play of words, it's just semantics, it's not. One is that it's encompassed, it's saying existence is, you see existence, and now you're seeing how it's encompassed, it's all the power of Atzmus. Now he's saying the Hesed itself is Atzmus. Not just this kol Atzmus, the concealment itself is Atzmus, which would seem to suggest it's not even talking about the power to conceal. It itself is Atzmus, which ultimately means existence itself is Atzmus. Let's see how he explains it. I'm on top of page 199 now. Mela is takafarana metzias, so there is actual existence. Now the metzias guf is Atzmus, and this metzias itself is Atzmus. So he's now going to give an example. Is lamoshel, like for example, via eitz, piece of wood. Eitz is a piece of wood. So you take a piece of wood, is neither pirish as is garnet faran kemitzias for eitz. Not the meaning, we're not saying that there's no tree. There's no wood, I should say. There's no wood. Eitz could also be tree. Eitz is tree, it's also wood. We're not saying there's no mitzias of eitz, of wood or tree. As it farana eitz, there exists an eitz, a tree or wood. No, does guf is Atzmus. That itself is Atzmus. V'ram Atzmus idachnei hakel. Atzmus carries everything. It carries everything within him. We don't understand that concept by ourselves because we don't carry everything with us, because we're not everything. We're not the table and the chair, the birds and so on. They're outside of us. But Atzmus is nesa hakel. He's a nesa dasech. So therefore he also carries. It's a Hebrew word. Carries here doesn't mean physically carry. It means contains. He contains. Is the mitzias from the mates? Is the nesa dasech? Is the mitzias from the mates? Is vi atzmus das nesa? So instead of the way we look at a piece of wood, we see a piece of wood. But here we're talking about how Atzmus is carrying or containing that piece of wood. And when Atzmus contains it or carries it, it's Atzmus. It's not the wood, it's Atzmus. Okay, now, follow along. I'll explain it. This is going to be very, very, very abstract wording. Is memela, as the eitz idos Atzmus, that the tree or the wood is Atzmus, as it says nid dos idos nid dos bitmiya. If it's not this, is it not this? In other words, which one is it? Eitz or Atzmus? She answers, esid dos, no dos and nid dos. It's wood, but it's not really what wood, as we understand what wood is, it's what Atzmus understands what wood is. Remember, I gave the example when we spoke about energy and matter. If you were able to interview a subatomic particle or the DNA and ask the atom or the subatomic particles, how do you see existence? What would they answer? Would they see it of wood? They would say water. Would they see an object? Well, they'd say no. All it is a combination of a certain mix, certain proper mix. H2O, hydrogen, oxygen is the molecules of water. Those molecules are made up of atoms. Those atoms are made of subatomic particles. From that perspective, it's completely subatomic energy. So, but is it water, or is it, or in this case, is it wood, or is it subatomic particles? The answer is depends who you ask. If you're talking from the outside, I see a piece of wood. The subatomic particles see subatomic particles. And the wood is just an outer so-called shell, if you wish. It's not an illusion, but it's a completely different reality when you understand it in the context of energy. Just like when you look at any formula, any formula, you look at the zeros and ones of computer program language. Those zeros and ones are really what's going on. When you press an A, B, C on your phone or on your computer, there's no ABC, actual ABC. Like, it's all, you're triggering a series of processes of electric impulses processes that in turn will produce something on this outer dimension on your screen. So what you're seeing on the screen really also has another perspective if you look at it at the zeros and ones. Someone was able to go into the inner wiring of anything, whether it's human anatomy or it's technology. There's a whole different reality when you look there. And in no way does it negate what we see. The only thing is we only see the outer surface. I'm just giving examples here. So what he's saying is like this. We're not talking about that existence is encompassed within Atzmus. That's the perspective when you still are looking at the wood and you say the wood is not really wood, it's really God's power to conceal. And that very power is also part of who he is. Here he's saying, we're not talking about two things here. We're talking about the Hester itself is Atzmus, the eights, and therefore the existence that it creates, that itself is Atzmus. It's just a different reality. It's how Atzmus sees eights, like he says, it is eights, but it's not eights as we know it. It's the eights as he knows it. And how he knows it, it's coming from a completely his own inner perspective, which is the Atzmus perspective, if you wish.
The only problem is that by
As it
Atzmus,
does, one second. As it does, no does and nidos. Das is Atzmus. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. You want to ask something? I will just tell you this. It's going to take work, a lot of work for you to wrap your head around this, because it takes time to think of it the proper way, because you're going to say, 1 second, but I see wood. And what does God see? Does he not see wood? So the answer is he sees wood, but who says what you see is the reality? You're seeing a very, very, like the tip of the iceberg. Someone will say, you see a dot. And then you realize this dot is the part of something that's a whole other reality. Just using some practical examples. Obviously, this is far deeper than that, but that's what he says. Go ahead. You want to ask something?
Your explanation is adding understanding, but the only thing is, these examples are in everything in this world. By Atzmus.
But for us, we need examples from this world. That's why I'm giving you examples.
Yeah, I understand. But by Atzmus, this question is not answered. Cannot be another existence beside him. So you want to say that to us, like the
what
tree.
Do you mean? He's nice. He can do whatever he wants. But why can't it? What do you mean? It's not besides him. It's him. It's him manifesting in the eights.
We try to explain in a very good sense. Right? It's him. But the eights is really not a separate entity. That's him. That's my point.
That's exactly what he's saying.
How there's no other existence.
Are you asking something? I'm not sure. You want to explain, or you're asking something?
I'm asking.
We just read this. I would suggest read it as many times as you need to. So you're asking, what does he mean when he says he says these words? Es is dos, no dos and nid dos. Are you trying to understand what that means?
Yeah.
It's called a paradox. I gave many good examples, in my opinion, of how energy looks at existence. Why are those examples not good examples? Explain to me why, when you ask a subatomic particle, what does water or what does wood look like? It will give you a very different answer than what you ask a child or someone that's looking from the outside in. So that's my example. To me, the example works quite well. Obviously, Atzmus is higher than that, but it's an example where it exists, but it exists the way as Atzmus, like he says. So he says clearly, you can't say, he says, it's not the pshat, it's stuck in eights. He says there is an eight, but it's eights is Atzmus.
Okay, so you said it yourself. The examples that you gave are very good, but when you
one second. So I'm not sure what you want exactly. I gave examples to try to help understand this paradox. So you're telling me that the examples are not good enough? Fine, so they're not. But for me, they're good enough to be able to somewhat grasp what he's trying to say here.
Very good. The only thing is that you said that the eighth is Atzmus.
I didn't say anything. I'm reading word for word from here. I said nothing. Read what the Rebbe Rashab says. Don't question. He says those words. He says, when the Atzmus is das Nesi, das Atzmus. His Bemeli is as the eighth is das Atzmus, as his Nid das is das Nid das, is his das, no das is Nid das. That's exactly the words of the Rebbe Rashab. So what's your question now? Those are the Rebbe Rashab words. I didn't say those words.
Possible that this is what the Rebbe Rashab said, midaftos lozon oif emune.
No, he's going to say, no, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, he's going to say at the end, this is not Amunah. You'll soon see. That's what he said by Mamata Lamayla. Anyway, let's read on. Das is Atzmus. No, das is Nidos. Das is Atzmus. Okay. Now he's going to continue and say, okay, but here we have, listen, I would highly recommend, don't process. At this point, just listen. Let's listen to what he says. Don't try to understand it yet. I always tell you about the Chazorah. Trust me, that's how you'll come to understand it. Right now, we have to just read what the Rebbe Rashab says. Think about it. And slowly, you'll come to understand it more and more. As I told you, I've been reading this for over 40 years, this piece. I always go back to it again and again. But you keep reading, you keep listening, and you'll see things start emerging. I'm just giving you my suggestion how to wrap your head around this. But now comes a question like this. Eights, piece of wood, is what when we say a piece of wood, forget about whether you call it wood or water or even energy or Atzmus. At the end of the day, a piece of wood is not a cup of water. It's not a frog. It's not a sky. It's a defined piece of wood. If you're saying it's Atzmus, that would suggest Atzmus is not defined by wood. Atzmus is everything. Everything in existence, whether it's wood, whether it's Daimim, Semeya, Chai, Medaber, and all the species. So what does this mean to say that this wood is Atzmus? Even if you were to say it's the energy within the wood, like the divine energy, the divine etzem within the wood, fine. But when you say, before when you said it's kol batzmusei, so there you could say God has the power to reveal, he has the power to conceal, Havaya and Elokim, and Havayu Elokim. So it's the power of concealment that creates existence. That power is really his power, it's all encompassed within it. So that's like saying the art is one piece of him, so to speak. And he created it. And the art is coming to understand the artist. But here we're saying it's mamish one. You're saying it's not kol batzmus. You say that eitz is atzmus. So he's now going to address, well, what about its definition? There's a thing called Hagbola. That's why you call it eitz. You don't call it atzmus. It's true that eitz is atzmus, but the eitz is also called eitz. So he's going to address now what that means. So he says like this. I said this is a very deep piece, but it's worthwhile learning. It's definitely going to elevate and refine your, let's put it this way, it's going to give, it's like I mentioned the other day, exercising your mind. It's like heavy lifting here, but you're going to have to really stretch your mind muscles here. So he says like this. Now, according to what we just said, is the dos Hagbola in Atzmus. So that would suggest there's a Hagbola in Atzmus. Because you're saying the eitz is Atzmus, the eitz is Hagbola, Hagbala simply means parameters, defined parameters, finite parameters. Hagbala and Siyur. Finite parameters, and Siyur is definition. Or structured. Siyur means an image. Siyur means there's a definition for it. And the Rebbe Rashab continues, "O der ganze Pekel von Elemus." This entire Pekel, in Yiddish, Pekel means this entire package of worlds, all of existence. It's a very endearing expression. This whole Pekel of Elam is that we see all the worlds and all the solar systems and all the universes, and every detail is all definition. It's all structure and definition. And you're saying that's all in Atzmus. So how do you explain that? We know Atzmus is not Hakbala. God is not defined by any definitions. So he says no name. Chulu. Not sure why there's a chulu here. Whoever the maniach was, maybe the Rebbe Rashab may have said more words. But bottom line, he's negating. He said that's not the case. Atzmus is nid b'bchinas hagbala. Atzmus is not in a state of any definitions or any defined parameters. So, but you just said that he created a tree, created wood. You're saying that wood is him. So if you said the wood is not him, it's only divine energy after it's concealed, and it goes through a Seder Shtash, is fine. That's exactly why we say that God and existence are not the same thing. But you're saying here that it's one and the same thing. It's not like the Miyuchad Nomata Lamaila, that there's an existence and the existence is encompassed within it. You're saying it's one thing. And now you're saying, so he says, and that thing, that wood is Akbala. Atzmus is not Akbala. Mipnei she'iyu tofis bikulo, meaning Iyu is referring to Atzmus, the Eibishter. He contains everything. Bikula Alman, I should add. He's toughest, he contains, he grasps, he's contained in all the worlds. V'les man the toughest bay. And nothing can grasp him. In other words, he contains everything, but nothing can contain him. Expression is similar, like hu mekeme shalele me'ena ela mekeme. Doesn't use that expression because this is even broader. That he is the space of existence, but existence is not his space. It means he encompasses everything, but not everything, but nothing encompasses him.
The wood is him, but he is not defined by the wood.
Correct. Exactly. That's what he's leading to. Okay. Werd das angerufen. This is called, when we say, I remember I mentioned the expression, Gott is als and als is Gott. That he, as Ed is als, he is everything, but not everything is him. In other words, it's, to put it in, let's use Spinoza's terminology of pantheism, there he said God is nature and nature is God. We say God is nature, but nature is not God. In other words, nature is an expression of godliness, but there's much more to God than that. But then comes the question is, so is the eights, which one is it? From Atzmus' point of view, is the wood like everything else in Atzmus? So we'll see exactly. He's getting to that. That's what we're in the middle of discussing. Yes, he's the wood is not him. Exactly. As Ed is out, he is everything. Umakol mokim, and though he's everything, including the wood, he's not defined by and contained by Hagbala. It's a very key word. I've mentioned a number of times when we learned Ayin Beis that though Atzmus is everything, but he's not defined and contained by it. I'll just give an example before we continue. It's like, for example, you have two children playing with each other. They're playing a game. And they're very engaged. Engaged is a good word here. They're engaged with each other. You know, we see children play. Then you as a parent or an adult walk into the room and you suddenly have a temptation to also play. You know, you want to play with your child. You sit down and start building a Lego or a puzzle or some other toy. What's the difference between the children and you? You've chosen to do this. Someone came into the room and said, oh, what, you've turned into a toddler? And says, no, I'm doing this because I want to do it, but I'm not contained by it. It's not me. That doesn't define me because I'm not that age. Not to dismiss for children, that's what they're engaged in. Their whole life can be around that. You take away the toy, they'll cry. Meaning there are things you can do that you are involved in, but doesn't engage you, meaning it's not defining you. Often when we talk, Chassidus talks about the idea that as you grow into an adult, you have more control over your emotions. So if you're younger, you're more immature. Someone insults you, often you'll impulsively or reflexively react. You become more moichen de gadlus is called, more mature mind. Certain things don't bother you, not because it bothers you and you ignore it, or it bothers you and you choose to not show that it's bothering you. Then you're still immature. You just know you're smart enough not to have a tantrum in the street, in public. No, you come to a point where certain things become petty. It's meaningless to you. What's it means meaning? Because you've come to a point you're not defined by that. No one can really hurt you in that because you have your own self-contained confidence. You're not going to be affected quite. So we talk about me. I'm giving you human examples here. With Atzmus, obviously, it's far infinitely more than that. So he can create something, create wood, but he's not defined by it. So is that Hagbola or not Hagbola? Hagbola would mean you're defined. For example, we must eat and drink and sleep and other things. We don't do that, God forbid, a person will come ill and die. We're bound by these rules. There's certain things we could do, things we can't do. Atzmus chooses to be engaged. When he chooses, he's engaged. But ultimately, he's not defined by it. So that's what it means. He's not nitviz b'agbola. He's not nitviz by it. No dosi dochaber outs. But it's what you say. Ed is outs. So it is outs, meaning everything that exists, which is defined. Sheyesh b'chinas hagbola. So there is hagbola because he created this hagbola. And if you look from the eyes of after the tzimtzum and the parsa, you see wood. That's all you'll see. You'll see wood. You'll see water. You'll see all the objects of existence. Not Atzmus vet nitvis in that hagbola. But Atzmus does not get defined and not contained. He's not bound by it, by the hagbola.
A very good muscle for this, I think, is this. Is somebody has a thought or somebody has an arm, and you can say the same thing. It's me, my thought, but I'm not defined by only that thought or my arm or something like this. I think it's a great muscle.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, any muscle that works that helps understand this is by all means. And listen, every muscle has its strengths, and every muscle for different people work different ways of understanding what he's saying here.
I would use the muscle that you use when you ask somebody, who are you? And he gives you his business card.
Yeah, that's what you do. That's not who you are, right? And then there are people who are completely defined by who they are, by what they do. Yeah.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question. We read
Just
it.
one second. Let me just one second. Yeah, go ahead.
In the Torah, we read that Yaakov was able to take sticks and be able to achieve the same result as someone were to put on tefillin. To me, I always had a question: how is that possible? And this very concept we just we're explaining, it explains it all. That yes, it's a piece of wood, but it's Atzmus, and that's exactly why he was able to achieve what somebody else would achieve with putting on tefillin with a bunch of sticks.
I would not bring that here because if Yaakov lived today, it would not be, he could not use sticks. He would have to use tefillin because that's before Matan Torah. So the tefillin mitzvah was not given yet. So he did it, what the Zohar says, that he did it spiritually, and the sticks served that purpose. But once the mitzvah was defined as tefillin, you can't just use wood, not Yaakov, not anyone. That's why the Rebbes and no one you'll see used wood. They used real tefillin, and tefillin has to be kosher tefillin. So I don't know if this helps understand that, because it's not like you can just take wood and turn it into tefillin. That's not what he's saying here. There's a mitzvah, the way mitzvah has real definitions, and you can't just do a mitzvah as you see fit, and you can't just say everything is Atzmus, so what do I need tefillin? I can use a piece of furniture and I'll do the mitzvah of tefillin. So that's another discussion. That's because we do live in a world of real Hagbola, and Shabbos begins Shabbos. Someone will say, I can do Shabbos every day of the week because it's all beyond any parameters of time and space. So I want to stay away from that right now, because the fact is Torah and Halacha is defined by time and space. You do something a minute before, it's a mitzvah. You do it a minute later, it's a terrible transgression. So that's a good discussion in the context of how you explain it with it. But I'd rather keep that aside because this is complicated enough. Right now, we're talking from the point of view of Atzmus and creation, how he sees all of existence. And remember, we're not Atzmus as well. He's saying how Atzmus is not defined. We are defined by our parameters. A man is a man, a woman is a woman. Shabbos is Shabbos, weekday is weekday. So we're talking here from the perspective of Atzmus now for a moment, before we talk about the reality. That's why there's also Yichud Mamata L'mayla. So I want to stay away from that discussion right now, because the same God actually created true parameters. Whether he's bound by it or not is another story. But there are real parameters in this world. You take away parameters, you can say evil is good and good is evil, God forbid. So you could say it's all one thing. It's just a matter of, but we're not bound by it, but we are. So that's why I would keep that as a separate discussion. Okay. You understand my point?
Yes. I mean, I totally understand it. But what I was saying, I wasn't suggesting that we could do that. I'm saying he was at the level, and you're right, it was before Matan Torah. But all I'm saying is he was
but I
able
would
to
not bring that here at all. That's not
Okay.
the reason. It's because we didn't have the mitzvahs yet, and there are ways that you can do it. It was really more the spiritual side of it. If you found those pieces of wood, they would not necessarily be holy, meaning you wouldn't, like tefillin, you're not supposed to throw out in the garbage. But the wood of Yaakov, if you happen to find it, didn't have any permanent effect on that wood. It was just a symbolic exercise. Okay. So there's Hagbola, and Atzmus vet nitfis in that Hagbola. So the truth is, I'd stop here, but I'll just say what he's going to say now, nor be'emes. I'll just read a few more lines. Now he adds one more thing. That this Hagbola itself, in truth, from the point of view of Atzmus, is not really, is not in the state of Hagbola. And he gives the example of Mokim Ma'odin, V'zeu al derech, Mokim Ma'odin eina min amida. When we say that the space of the Holy Ark, Mokim, the space, eina min amida, is not measurable. Did not occupy space. It was a real miracle. What it means is, as we're told, that the Holy of Holies, if you measured from one wall to the wall, it would occupy space. You measured the ark, it would occupy space. But then if you measured from wall to wall with the ark, it's as if the ark didn't exist. So it's Mokamon Eina min amida, which is, of course, a complete contradiction, a complete paradox. So he explains, Shagam shoyi b'chinas mokim, even though the ark, it says clearly, was built with measurements. Shahaya amasayim v'chetzi arke. Its length was 2.5 amas. V'ama v'chetzi rochve, and 1.5 in length, and 1.5 amas in width. Und is dort gestanden in mokim, and the ark stood in a physical place. You could see it. It occupied space. U'makom mokim is given mokim on eina min amida. And nevertheless, when you measured it that way, it didn't measure. How's it possible? I see a table. It's let's say a 2x4. Then you measure and it's not 2x4. How does that make sense? In other words, it's there, but it's not occupying space. That means the mokim itself was not really mokum as we understand it as occupying space. It's not nitfus. And similarly is how it is the yichud mamayla lamata. How Atzmus, how existence is within Atzmus, not lamat lamayla, encompassed within him. Meaning there is existence, but you're explaining how it's really all a power of Atzmus. Here it's Atzmus one with existence. There's an actual defined state. But the Hagbala itself is not Hagbala like we spoke about before. This is the yichud that we come to. That is Mamayla Mata, how we see, the best we can see it from Atzmus eyes. But das versteh, here now he says, was das versteh mir la'orche u'lerachve. Before he said, we don't understand completely Mamat Lamayla. And there's a part that we don't fully reach. Here he says we understood la'orche to its length and to its width. He's using the same term that he just used with the Adon. There's length and width. He says, this we understand la'orche u'lerachve. However, we have to read the next few lines. They're amazing. But if as midafun God of them came in a way we don't need any amunah for this. That's what the Rebbe Rashab says. But listen to the next line. Hateva samuz goddess Omer upon him secha case. Hamaitik. Maitik means the person who copied this and who wrote this down says this last parentheses that this we understand and we don't need a munah. He said with a smile on his face. The Rebbe Rashab said it with a smile. So that alone, we could have a whole fabring and what that smile indicates. So in contrast to what he said before, that Momata Lamaila, interestingly, we don't fully understand. Here he's saying we can understand we don't need a munah. And that alone, he said with a smile, which could mean that is all of us understand that. I'll discuss that more in the next class. I just wanted to finish the paragraph about Mamayla Lamata, not leave it hanging. So there you have it. Now, good luck wrapping your head around this. It's not easy at all, but this is, I just felt very driven to read this with you, learn it together. We're going to discuss it more, of course. But as I said, I think that the best way to understand, to try to begin understanding is to read it again. And you'll need a lot of abstraction. This is really a test of how much we can get out of our own, we'll call it the defined parameters of logic. You know, if you're going to use your usual logical deductions and mathematical equations, it's going to be very hard to understand this. That's why I used examples from atoms. And if you take quantum could also be very helpful here, because you really need to look at things not with the regular tools of rationale. Not that it's irrational. It definitely expands one's way of thinking of what existence is, and it's almost like what we call a paradox. By Atzmus, there's no paradox, but for us that's very hard to understand because the whole meaning of paradox means opposites. So we can understand there's some things that are paradoxes, but to understand a level that a paradox is not even a paradox because it's just a different type of reality is essentially part of what we need to come to terms here. And that's the Yichud Mamay Lamata. Like earlier, what he said, we don't fully understand because there's a paradox involved. Here you're coming to say there's no paradox because Atzmus doesn't have paradoxes, doesn't have rules. So there can be existence, and existence itself is Atzmus, and he's not bound by it. So there's Hagbola and there's no Hagbola, all in one. Now, the question obviously is, I mentioned before, mitzvahs absolutely require Hagbola. There's Azman Krishma, there's a time you daven, the time different mitzvahs are done different times. Certain mitzvahs are not allowed to be done different times, etc. So how does that reconcile with all of this? That we'll talk about as well. But these are the two levels of Yichud. So I will stop here, top of the column 2 on page 199. A little more to go. And then, as you see, this will all help us understand the Ayin Beis we're learning.
Was the smile, was the smile like we don't that we don't understand, even not weird stuff, like not needed, not that
I mean,
paradox.
the ostensible
I think
smile
that's
is
what
because
it's
before he said we need al-munah, and here suddenly he's talking about something so much deeper, and he says this we could understand, and we don't even need al-munah. So it's like, the Rebbe Rashab sensed the amusing element of this. It's an amusing thought that a deeper level is. I mean, we could explain it many ways. I don't think he was smiling because I understand it and you don't. That's not what he was. I think it was more like I'm getting to a much deeper level that the Yichud Mamayla Lamata doesn't need a munah, but Yichud Mamat Lamayla needs a munah. Interesting twist of thinking, right? You think this one about Atzmus being one, and Mokim Arden, that space is not space and limit is not limit, would seem to be bigger stretch of the mind than what he spoke about earlier. That's my initial reaction when I say smile.
But we can see clearly that those terms from Lamayla Lamata aren't using our framework of logic, and that's clear that we know that we can't know.
That's very well said. Exactly the point. That once you look at it from there, like that's what he said. When you climb the mountain from the bottom, you have to go through the obstacles of logic and till you get there. Where you go, if the one from the top comes down to you, meaning Atzmus is coming down to you, and it's your effort to bring that down to you. It's coming on his terms. So then exactly. In other words, you suspended your laws of logic, then you're going with a whole different set of, it's a whole different set of rules. Or no rules for that matter. We'll talk about, there's a lot to talk about what this all means, but fascinating stuff, no?
Amazing.
Yeah, really amazing.
This I wish the world would know. Most people have no clue that Chassidus has these type of concepts. Many Jews I've met in my journey would tell me that these are ideas that what impressed them with Lahavdil Buddhism. When they began to study some Buddhism and they studied that world where beyond paradoxes, where you suspend your logical way of thinking and understand the different reality. That's, and any of you have ever read the book The Tao of Physics by Fridtjof Capra? He's an American physicist. He changed his name later. Anyone ever saw that book? I have that book somewhere. Interesting book. Everything that we learn at Chassidus is even further than that book, but that book puts into words a lot of ideas that I know lahavdil, I guess, but it does give language to a lot of the ideas that we're learning here. So I don't look to it for the concepts. I look for the language. There's good language there.
Yeah, that's important to know that there is the possibility that people on the outside or who haven't received this wisdom would be able to relate to it in some way because those ideas are out there. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. When I began giving my class years ago, so there were some people who were students of Steve Alpert, Ramdas. And though I didn't meet him, but I shared with them to share with him some of these ideas. And he said he can't believe that it's in Judaism. He thought that's why he left his Judaism, because he found it in Buddhism. So I remember hearing from them that had he learned in Chassidus, he probably would have been a big chassid. He wouldn't need the Buddhist. But many Jews found it elsewhere because they didn't find it in Torah. Like when you learn Gemara and you learn conventional mainstream Jewish thought, you don't really hear about this side of things.
Well, God willing, they'll be able to hear about it now.
That's the purpose. That's the goal.
Maybe this should be
the
one of
smile
the
of
first things we teach young people.
I think the smile of the Rebbe Rashab is, as you mentioned, is contradicting himself. First he said you have to have a munah. And then it says, this, you don't need a munah. What happened is, when you start without learning Chassidus, you need a munah. Once you learn Chassidus, you don't need a munah. It's understood. You need a munah for a higher level. So for a beginner, you need a munah. Once you study Ayin Beis, you don't need a munah anymore. You need a munah for something else. But for this, you understand Moki Moa, Minamido.
Well, I don't know if I'd agree with that because the first yichud v'mat l'mayla is also chassidus. I think we'll soon understand that we need both. He's not going and saying once you have the yichud from the mayla mata, you don't need yichud mamat l'mayla. We actually do need both. Just like we need yichud tata and yichud ilah, you can't just jump straight to this higher level of atzmus, because we have to permeate existence on our terms with this level of yichud. He's explaining what yichud mayla mata is, but he's not negating that you need yichud mamat l'mayla too. We'll talk about it. That's why it's even more fascinating, because what you're talking here is really it's true that we are coming to appreciate two ways of looking at existence through the eyes of God, but there's much more to the topic. That's why I want to finish reading it all. Then we could go back and say, are there 3 levels here, 2 levels? That's where Ayin Beis comes back into play here. We'll get there.
I meant to say,
now we can stay
before the
excited about the Sichud Mamayla Lamat. Huh?
But I'm saying before the Sikha, the Rebbe Rashab said, so you have to be Muneh. Once he explained that, he says, you still need a Muneh. But that's why he was smiling. I explained it to you. Now you don't need a Muneh. Yeah, now you understand.
No, I don't think that's what he means. Because he's still saying that Mumat Lamayla does need a Muneh. He's not negating that. He says Mamayla Lamata doesn't need. That's the distinction. Okay. So let's stop here. Let me stop the recording. Top of page 199, I said, right?
Great question.
Sure.